Welcome back. President Trump plans to meet with Florida high schoolers, and he's going to talk to them on Wednesday to discuss calls for tougher gun laws, which they were not shy about expressing yesterday.
What we need to do here is come together, not as Democrats or Republicans, but as Americans, and work together to solve this issue through love and compassion.
Please stop allowing us to be gunned down in our hallways. We want students to be at that march and to be with us. We want to be with those students who we didn't understand their pain before, and it's all too tragic that we all have to understand the same pain now.
Of course, she was referencing the massive rally against gun violence the students plan to hold in Washington, D.C. March 24th. Now, earlier today, a White House spokesperson said the president would be on board for strengthening federal background checks, but it's unclear what that would entail, and it's fair to ask how effective these new laws could be or if they could be enforced, given the FBI has admitted their blunder in investigating the shooter. Katie Pavlich joins me now, editor-in-chief at townhall.com and a Fox News contributor. So, Katie, you and I have talked about guns many times, but this shooting, all mass shootings, are illuminating and tragic in their own way. And this one feels different in that both sides are talking about new ways of reforming, if not gun laws, background checks. How do you feel about that, and what do those reforms look like so far?
Yeah, so, we have the usual back and forth of blaming the NRA and the finger pointing, but it would be nice if we could get past that into real solutions to the problem. Here we have a massive failure of the bureaucracy. The FBI has a lot of explaining to do in the sense of how is it that this student was reported twice and he wasn't arrested or at least talked to by the FBI. That's a separate issue.
Can I ask you a quick question about that? Because this is something that has come up in Florida. Governor Rick Scott has called for FBI Director Christopher Wray's resignation in light of that. And, he put forth a statement saying that the tip line information was not passed on to the Miami field office where there would have been a further investigation.
Right.
Do you think Wray should resign?
Look, he was not in charge when this call came in.
Yeah.
And so I'm not sure the FBI director is at fault here. However, the FBI now has a record of missing these things. The Charleston church shooter, for example, had a charge on his record that should have prevented him from buying a firearm in the federal background check system.
brothers.
Right. He went through the Tsarnaev brothers.
San Bernardino shooters.
Right. So we have over and over again this being missed by the FBI. So they have some explaining to do about why their system is failing them and in return failing American students and American communities at large. But getting back to your initial question about the background check system, there are things that can be changed that actually don't necessarily go into the gun control realm.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of talk about mental health. There's one big problem in the United States with the way that mental health records are put into the background check system. States are not now required by law to enter in mental health records, meaning someone who has been adjudicated or someone who has been committed to a mental institution to be put into the background check system. Currently, people who have been committed to mental institutions are prohibited from buying firearms. It's also a question on the background check system.
Involuntarily, though, correct?
Right, involuntarily, correct. So that is something that they can change. I believe the Cornyn bill does try and address that.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand,
But this kid wasn't institutionalized.
Exactly.
I mean, that's why there are so many problems here, and I understand people's frustration. I understand these students' frustration because they were sitting ducks.
Yeah.
They were not adequately protected, and they were let down by their school, local law enforcement, the FBI. I mean, if you have cops visiting a house 30-plus times, 36+ times, and not writing anything up, there's something wrong there.
Well, and we've heard a lot from students who want more gun control. It's their right to call for that, especially after everything they've been through. However, who you're not hearing from is a lot of the students who are there who are calling for teachers to be armed. Yeah. And the fact is that in this country, schools are some of the softest targets that we have. And this isn't necessarily just a federal issue. There are a number of school districts across the country in states like Utah, Texas, Missouri, Colorado that allow trained teachers to carry concealed inside of their schools. We always look to the federal government in Washington, D.C. for a solution after these things. Right. But it's not necessarily a federal solution. And when you have a pile of regulations that were completely bypassed by this person who committed this heinous crime, adding more bureaucracy on top of that begs the question of whether something would be prevented. And also, this is an element of human error. And until you can take human error out of the equation, that's a problem.
Which is why the background check system is supposed to supersede that.
Right.
And it's supposed to take care of where human beings might be forgetful or there would be oversight. Unfortunately, there are flaws and gaps within the background check system.
Right.
And information that should be entered in there isn't necessarily.
And overall, the background check system actually has been very effective. The FBI did 25 million background checks in 2017 with lawful persons who were purchasing firearms. There are a number of people who were denied firearms background checks as a result of criminal convictions, being involuntarily committed to mental institutions.
Yeah, restraining orders.
Right, but they're, based on the sheer volume and number of them, which could be a resource issue, which again, the FBI is going to have to come to the table and explain why this keeps happening so that Congress can actually do something that would be effective.
There needs to be more transparency so we can see where and how they're spending the money. Katie, we have to go, but we will definitely continue this discussion.
Absolutely.
Nice
Thank you
to see
so much.
For a second time
you
today.
too. Thank you.
Very good.